this video, we'll be looking at the rules for comparing factors and products when talking about multiplying fractions and mixed numbers. When we are comparing them, we're going to be using our less than, greater than, or equal to signs. Let's go ahead and jump in. For the first one, it says when both factors, do we need to review? That a factor, if I were to say 3 times 4 equals 12, the 3 and the 4 are factors and the 12 is the product. So when both factors are fractions less than 1, which means that the numerator is smaller than the denominator, the product will be less than both factors. So this is something we talked about when we did our shading in the models of fractions. So first things first, I'm going to look at these. I'm going to look at my 5, 6 and say the 5 is less than the 1. So it is a proper fraction less than 1 times 3/4. Now my 3 is less than my 4, so I know this is also a proper fraction less than 1. So if I was to multiply 5, 6 times 3/4, the answer will always be less than both of the factors. So I see I have 5, 6 times 3/4. Is that going to be greater than, less than, or equal to 5, 6? It will always be less than both of the factors because the factors are less than 1. It's very important that we remember that it's only with fractions less than 1 that happens. Let's go ahead and look at this next one. 2/3 times 4/5. Knowing what you know about the rule, do you think 2/3 times 4/5 is going to be greater than, less than, or equal to 2/3? I hope you said less than, because we know whenever we multiply two fractions less than 1, the product is going to be less than both of the factors. Let's go ahead and move on to our next rule. When one factor is 1, the product will be equal to the other factor. Now, this one's pretty common sense for most of you. And whenever I say 4 times 1, I know that my answer is going to be 4. Same thing here. 5, 6 times 1 is going to equal 5, 6. That one's pretty simple. But let's look at this next one. 1/2 times 1. I know that's going to equal 1/2 because I'm multiplying 1/2 times 1. And that is less than 1. Now, this could get a little tricky. Let's say I had 6/5 times 1. That would be greater than 1 because 6/5 is an improper fraction. Since I know that the 6 is greater than the 5, I could simplify the 6/5 to 1 1/5. So if I were to say 1 1/5 times 1, I know the answer would be 1 1/5, which is greater than 1. So you kind of got to think about what your answer is going to be. But the whole point of comparing them is that we kind of guess what the answer is going to be without solving it. Let's jump into our next rule. When one factor is greater than 1, the product will be greater than the smaller factor, but less than the larger one. All right, that sounds like a lot. It isn't. Take a look down here at my factors. I see I've got 6/5. I know that that is greater than 1. Because I know that 6/5 is really 1 1/5. So if I multiply a fraction greater than 1 times a fraction smaller than 1, like 1/3 is smaller than 1, my answer is going to be bigger than the smaller fraction. Let's look at that one more time. If I multiply a fraction greater than 1, like my 6/5, times a fraction smaller than 1, my answer is going to be greater than the smaller fraction. So that's exactly what it says up here. The product will be greater than the smaller factor. Let's look at this next problem. 4/3 times 5, 6. I know that 4/3 is an improper fraction. I know that that equals 1 1/3. So if I take a factor greater than 1 and multiply it by a fraction less than 1, my answer is going to be less than the larger factor. So it'll be smaller. It'll be bigger than the smaller factor and less than the bigger factor. Well, that sounded confusing. Let's go back and read that rule one more time. When one factor is greater than 1, the product will be greater than the smaller factor. So that's the example right here. When this product is greater than 1, the answer is going to be greater than the smaller factor. But it will be less than the larger factor. This is something you're just going to have to practice with. And remember, when you're in proper fractions, it's not always going to be less than. You're just going to have to take a look and really kind of look and see which factors you're comparing to the product. Let's take a look at our last rule. You're going to get lots of practice with these today. When both factors are greater than 1, the product will be greater than both factors. This one's so much easier. So I've got 6/5. I know that that is greater than 1 because it's equal to 1 1/5. And I've got 5/3. I know that's greater than 1 because it's really equal to 1 2/3. Remember, anytime that numerator is bigger than the denominator, it's an improper fraction that is greater than 1. So I've got 2 improper fractions. If I follow the rule, when both factors are greater than 1, the product will be greater than both factors. So I know that 6/5 times 5/3 will be greater than 5/3 by itself. Super simple there. 6/4 times 3/2, do you think it will be greater than, less than, or equal to 6/4? I really hope you said greater than, because we know that when both factors are greater than 1, the product will be greater than both factors. So that shows us that this last rule is pretty easy to follow. Let's take a look at the rest of them and kind of get a gist on how we feel about them. So when both factors are less than 1, the answer will be less than both factors. When both factors are greater than 1, the product will be greater than both factors. Those are pretty easy. When one factor is 1, the product will be equal to the other factor. That one's okay. When one factor is greater than 1, the product will be greater than the smaller factor, but less than the larger one. This is probably the one you're going to have to reference the most when you are doing your classwork today. Just make sure you're looking really carefully and keep those notes out and take a look at them while you're doing your classwork, and that'll definitely help you keep on the right track today. I hope you understood all of these. Make sure you have it filled in completely and go ahead and get started on that classwork.